The question is not so much whether there is life on Mars as whether it will continue to be possible to live on Earth. Man must be disciplined, for he is by nature raw and wild. Immaturity is the incapacity to use one's intelligence without the guidance of another. Only the descent into the hell of self-knowledge can pave the way to godliness. Honesty is better than any policy. I had therefore to remove knowledge, in order to make room for belief. Always treat people as ends in themselves, never as means to an end. Life is the faculty of spontaneous activity, the awareness that we have powers. Humanity is at its greatest perfection in the race of the whites. When I could have used a wife, I could not support one, and when I could support one, I no longer needed any. Dare to know. Have the courage to use your own intelligence. Melancholy characterizes those with a superb sense of the sublime. Morality is not properly the doctrine of how we may make ourselves happy, but how we may make ourselves worthy of happiness. Out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing was ever made. Thoughts without content are empty, intuitions without concepts are blind. One who makes himself a worm cannot complain afterwards if people step on him. The busier we are, the more acutely we feel that we live, the more conscious we are of life. It is not God's will merely that we should be happy, but that we should make ourselves happy. You only know me as you see me, not as I actually am. Rules for happiness, something to do, someone to love, something to hope for. We are not rich by what we possess but by what we can do without. Patience is the strength of the weak, impatience is the weakness of the strong. 3 things tell a man: his eyes, his friends, and his favorite quotes. But a lie is a lie, and in itself intrinsically evil, whether it be told with good or bad intents. There is a limit where the intellect fails and breaks down, and this limit is where the questions concerning God and free will and immortality arise. Do the right thing because it is right. Science is organized knowledge. Wisdom is organized life. The bad thing of war is that it makes more evil people than it can take away. The only thing permanent is change. We can judge the heart of a man by his treatment of animals. Always recognize that human individuals are ends, and do not use them as means to your end. The human heart refuses to believe in a universe without a purpose. In law, a man is guilty when he violates the rights of others. In ethics, he is guilty if he only thinks of doing so. The wise man can change his mind, the stubborn one, never. Live your life as though your every act were to become a universal law. Give a man everything he wants, and at that moment everything is not everything. Maturity is having the courage to use one's own intelligence. Great minds think for themselves. Heaven has given human beings 3 things to balance the odds of life: hope, sleep, and laughter. There are 2 things that don't have to mean anything. One is music and the other is laughter. For peace to reign on earth, humans must evolve into new beings who have learned to see the whole first. Do what is right, though the world may perish. The 2 great dividers are religion and language. The hand is the visible part of the brain. Space and time are the framework within which the mind is constrained to construct its experience of reality. One is not rich by what one owns, but more by what one is able to do without with dignity. Perpetual peace is only found in the graveyard. If man makes himself a worm, he must not complain when he is trodden on. Look closely. The beautiful may be small. Ingratitude is the essence of vileness. Genius is the ability to independently arrive at and understand concepts that would normally have to be taught by another person. All our knowledge begins with the senses, proceeds then to the understanding, and ends with reason. There is nothing higher than reason. There can be no doubt that all our knowledge begins with experience. It is through good education that all the good in the world arises. It is never too late to become reasonable and wise. A single line in the Bible has consoled me more than all the books I ever read besides. If justice perishes, human life on earth has lost its meaning. The greatest human quest is to know what one must do in order to become a human being. Experience without theory is blind, but theory without experience is mere intellectual play. All perception is colored by emotion. Act in such a way that you will be worthy of being happy. I have no knowledge of myself as I am, but merely as I appear to myself. Two things awe me most, the starry sky above me and the moral law within me. Two things strike me dumb, the infinite starry heavens, and the sense of right and wrong in man. Suicide is not abominable because God prohibits it. God prohibits it because it is abominable. Reason can never prove the existence of God. Maximum individuality within maximum community. All human knowledge begins with intuitions, proceeds from thence to concepts, and ends with ideas. Happiness, though an indefinite concept, is the goal of all rational beings. The nice thing about living in a small town is that when you don't know what you're doing, someone else does. Happiness is not an ideal of reason, but of imagination. Procrastination is hardly more evil than grasping impatience. Riches ennoble a man's circumstances, but not himself. Thinking in pictures precedes thinking in words. Art is purposiveness without purpose. A society that is not willing to demand a life of somebody who has taken somebody else's life is simply immoral. The possession of power inevitably spoils the free use of reason. God, freedom, and immortality are untenable in the light of pure reason. I am an investigator by inclination. I feel a great thirst for knowledge. An action is essentially good if the motive of the agent be good, regardless of the consequences. Freedom can never be comprehended, nor even can insight into it be gained. If I am to constrain you by any law, it must be one by which I am also bound. If a man is often the subject of conversation, he soon becomes the subject of criticism. It is often necessary to make a decision on the basis of knowledge sufficient for action but insufficient to satisfy the intellect. Religion is the recognition of all our duties as divine commands. Fallacious and misleading arguments are most easily detected if set out in correct syllogistic form. Art does not want the representation of a beautiful thing, but the representation of something beautiful. Our intellect does not draw its laws from nature, but it imposes its laws upon nature. The enjoyment of power inevitably corrupts the judgment of reason, and perverts its liberty. Human reason is by nature architectonic. Is it reasonable to assume a purposiveness in all the parts of nature and to deny it to the whole? Philosophy stands in need of a science which shall determine the possibility, principles, and extent of human knowledge a priori. There is nothing higher than reason. Metaphysics is a dark ocean without shores or lighthouse, strewn with many a philosophic wreck. The only thing that is good without qualification is a good will. Thrift is care and scruple in the spending of one's means. It is not a virtue and it requires neither skill nor talent. Laws always lose in energy what the government gains in extent. Physicians think they do a lot for a patient when they give his disease a name. Beneficence is a duty. It is not necessary that whilst I live happily, but it is necessary that so long as I live I should live honorably. Freedom is that faculty that enlarges the usefulness of all other faculties. The death of dogma is the birth of morality. Have the courage to use your own reason, that is the motto of enlightenment. Foundations of the Metaphysics of Morals, 1785. With men, the state of nature is not a state of peace, but war. By a lie, a man annihilates his dignity as a man. Nothing is divine but what is agreeable to reason. Asterisk 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 3 conditions of happiness asterisk 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 if you have work to do, if you have someone you love, if you have hope, then you are happy now. All our knowledge falls with the bounds of experience. Even a man's exact imitation of the song of the nightingale displeases us when we discover that it is a mimicry, and not the nightingale. Law and freedom without violence, anarchy; law and violence without freedom, despotism; violence without freedom and law, barbarism; violence with freedom and law, republic. He who has made great moral progress ceases to pray. Act so that the maxim of your act could be made the principle of a universal law. There is no virtue in penance and fasting which waste the body, they are only fanatical and monkish. Animals are there merely as a means to an end. That end is man. If education is to develop human nature so that it may attain the object of its being, it must involve the exercise of judgment. Reason is given to us as a practical faculty, that is, as one that influences the will. Beauty presents an indeterminate concept of understanding, the sublime an indeterminate concept of reason. I ought never to act except in such a way that I could also will that my maxim should become a universal law. Among all nations, through the darkest polytheism glimmer some faint sparks of monotheism. Duty is the necessity to act out of reverence for the law. Sincerity is the indispensable ground of all conscientiousness, and by consequence of all heartfelt religion. Apart from moral conduct, all that man thinks himself able to do in order to become acceptable to God is mere superstition and religious folly. A categorical imperative would be one which represented an action as objectively necessary in itself, without reference to any other purpose. Prudence approaches, conscience accuses. Nature does nothing in vain, and in the use of means to her goals she is not prodigal. All natural capacities of a creature are destined to evolve completely to their natural end. Each according to his own way of seeing things, seek one goal, that is gratification. Enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-incurred immaturity. Give me matter, and I will construct a world out of it. Human beings are never to be treated as a means but always as ends. Act that your principle of action might safely be made a law for the whole world. Better the whole people perish than that injustice be done. The science of mathematics presents the most brilliant example of how pure reason may successfully enlarge its domain without the aid of experience. Reason should investigate its own parameters before declaring its omniscience. In the mere concept of one thing it cannot be found any character of its existence. I assert that, in any particular natural science, one encounters genuine scientific substance only to the extent that mathematics is present. But although all our knowledge begins with experience, it does not follow that it arises from experience. In all judgments by which we describe anything as beautiful, we allow no one to be of another opinion. Philosophical knowledge is the knowledge gained by reason from concepts. Mathematical knowledge is the knowledge gained by reason from the construction of concepts. Imagination is a powerful agent for creating, as it were, a second nature out of the material supplied to it by actual nature. All appearances are real and negatio, sophistical, all reality must be sensation. From such crooked wood as that which man is made of, nothing straight can be fashioned. An action, to have moral worth, must be done from duty. Nature, when left to universal laws, tends to produce regularity out of chaos. We can never, even by the strictest examination, get completely behind the secret springs of action. But only he who, himself enlightened, is not afraid of shadows. Psychologists have hitherto failed to realize that imagination is a necessary ingredient of perception itself. The existence of the Bible is the greatest blessing which humanity ever experienced. Notion without intuition is empty, intuition without notion is blind. It is precisely in knowing its limits that philosophy consists. The business of philosophy is not to give rules, but to analyze the private judgments of common reason. Nature even in chaos cannot proceed otherwise than regularly and according to order. Have patience a while, slanders are not long-lived. Truth is the child of time, ere long she shall appear to vindicate thee. Freedom in the practical sense is the independence of the power of choice from necessitation by impulses of sensibility. Standing armies shall in time be totally abolished. Every human being should always be treated as an end and never as a mere instrument. Physicians think they are doing something for you by labeling what you have as a disease. Act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. What are the aims which are at the same time duties? They are perfecting of ourselves, the happiness of others. All false art, all vain wisdom, lasts its time but finally destroys itself, and its highest culture is also the epoch of its decay. Everything in nature acts in conformity with law. A lie is the abandonment and, as it were, the annihilation of the dignity by men. Ours is an age of criticism, to which everything must be subjected. An organized product of nature is that in which all the parts are mutually ends and means. In every department of physical science there is only so much science, properly so called, as there is mathematics. Aristotle formal logic thus far, 1787, has not been able to advance a single step, and hence is to all appearances closed and completed. Freedom is the alone unoriginated birthright of man, and belongs to him by force of his humanity. What can I know? What ought I to do? What may I hope? Prudence reproaches, conscience accuses. How then is perfection to be sought? Wherein lies our hope? In education, and in nothing else. I am myself by inclination an investigator. All our knowledge begins with the senses. Upon the solution of this problem, or upon sufficient proof of the impossibility of synthetical knowledge a priori, depends the existence or downfall of metaphysics. Man relates to material things through direct insight rather than reason. Innocence is indeed a glorious thing, but, unfortunately, it does not keep very well and is easily led astray. So act that anything you do may become universal law. It is difficult for the isolated individual to work himself out of the immaturity which has become almost natural for him. Act so as to use humanity, yourself and others, always as an end and never as a means to an end. Upon the solution of this problem, or upon sufficient proof of the impossibility of synthetical knowledge a priori, depends the existence or downfall of metaphysics. Man relates to material things through direct insight rather than reason. Innocence is indeed a glorious thing, but, unfortunately, it does not keep very well and is easily led astray. So act that anything you do may become universal law. It is difficult for the isolated individual to work himself out of the immaturity which has become almost natural for him. Act so as to use humanity, yourself and others, always as an end and never as a means to an end. Upon the solution of this problem, or upon sufficient proof of the impossibility of synthetical knowledge a priori, depends the existence or downfall of metaphysics. Man relates to material things through direct insight rather than reason. Innocence is indeed a glorious thing, but, unfortunately, it does not keep very well and is easily led astray. So act that anything you do may become universal law. It is difficult for the isolated individual to work himself out of the immaturity which has become almost natural for him. Act so as to use humanity, yourself and others, always as an end and never as a means to an end. Upon the solution of this problem, or upon sufficient proof of the impossibility of synthetical knowledge a priori, depends the existence or downfall of metaphysics. Man relates to material things through direct insight rather than reason. Innocence is indeed a glorious thing, but, unfortunately, it does not keep very well and is easily led astray. So act that anything you do may become universal law. It is difficult for the isolated individual to work himself out of the immaturity which has become almost natural for him. Act so as to use humanity, yourself and others, always as an end and never as a means to an end. Upon the solution of this problem, or upon sufficient proof of the impossibility of synthetical knowledge a priori, depends the existence or downfall of metaphysics. Man relates to material things through direct insight rather than reason. Innocence is indeed a glorious thing, but, unfortunately, it does not keep very well and is easily led astray. So act that anything you do may become universal law. It is difficult for the isolated individual to work himself out of the immaturity which has become almost natural for him. Act so as to use humanity, yourself and others, always as an end and never as a means to an end. Upon the solution of this problem, or upon sufficient proof of the impossibility of synthetical knowledge a priori, depends the existence or downfall of metaphysics. Man relates to material things through direct insight rather than reason. Innocence is indeed a glorious thing, but, unfortunately, it does not keep very well and is easily led astray. So act that anything you do may become universal law. It is difficult for the isolated individual to work himself out of the immaturity which has become almost natural for him. Act so as to use humanity, yourself and others, always as an end and never as a means to an end. Upon the solution of this problem, or upon sufficient proof of the impossibility of synthetical knowledge a priori, depends the existence or downfall of metaphysics. Man relates to material things through direct insight rather than reason. Innocence is indeed a glorious thing, but, unfortunately, it does not keep very well and is easily led astray. So act that anything you do may become universal law. It is difficult for the isolated individual to work himself out of the immaturity which has become almost natural for him. Act so as to use humanity, yourself and others, always as an end and never as a means to an end. Upon the solution of this problem, or upon sufficient proof of the impossibility of synthetical knowledge a priori, depends the existence or downfall of metaphysics. Man relates to material things through direct insight rather than reason. Innocence is indeed a glorious thing, but, unfortunately, it does not keep very well and is easily led astray. So act that anything you do may become universal law. It is difficult for the isolated individual to work himself out of the immaturity which has become almost natural for him. Act so as to use humanity, yourself and others, always as an end and never as a means to an end.